On the rainy Saturday evening of my 35th birthday, I decided to do something I had never dared to do in my 12 years as a pediatric ICU nurse. I planned a celebration where I was meant to be the guest rather than the staff. For over a decade at St. Jude Children's Hospital in Cleveland, my adult life had been measured in night shifts, color-coded family calendars, and unpaid emotional labor. Remembering medical appointments, reading refinance paperwork, and sacrificing weekend off shifts so I would never miss a Sunday dinner. Reaching 35 felt like standing on a quiet threshold, a tender moment where I foolishly believed I could step out of the shadows of logistical duty and sit at a table someone else showed up to. I reserved the large, round table in the back room at Harlow's, the historic downtown steakhouse with soft green lamps and warm bread, where my late grandmother Ruth used to take me when I was small and needed to feel truly seen. I ordered a lemon cake with raspberry filling from the 4th Street Bakery, watching with an embarrassing flutter of hope as the baker piped, "Happy 35th, Nora," in crisp white buttercream. I even spent my Thursday afternoon at the public library printing delicate custom dinner menus on heavy cardstock. It was a modest request. 2 hours, 8 chairs, 1 shared meal. Yet as I placed those small printed menus beside the polished silverware, I felt an unspoken prayer taking shape in my chest, hoping that showing up for everyone else all my life might finally mean someone would show up for me. By 8:20 that evening, the heavy silence hanging over the round table at Harlow's had become far louder than the quiet chatter of the surrounding dining room. I sat with my back straight against the leather booth, holding on to the steady composure that 12 years of performing chest compressions on critically ill children instills in a person. The white tablecloth remained pristine, decorated only by 8 printed menus, 8 unused silver forks, and a single lemon cake whose central candle was slowly guttering into a pool of melted wax. My texts to the family group chat had been quietly marked as seen nearly an hour earlier, without a single reply, leaving me stranded in a sea of polite restaurant pity. When the gentle 25-year-old waiter returned for the 4th time to relight the candle without uttering a word of judgment, the kindness in his eyes felt heavier to bear than the abandonment itself. Finally, with a cold clarity settling over my pulse, I dialed my mother's number. Evelyn picked up on the 4th ring, her voice floating through the receiver, accompanied by a bright swell of classical music, clinking champagne flutes, and my sister Chloe's distinct, soaring laughter. When I asked where everyone was, my mother did not offer a frantic apology or a breathless excuse. She simply let out a light, social laugh, the effortless chuckle she reserved for church committee meetings, and casually murmured, "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. We had much more important plans, and we knew you'd make it all about you anyway." The casual indifference in her voice was not born of sudden malice, which made the betrayal infinitely more surgical. It was the practiced dismissiveness of a woman who had spent 40 years managing family narratives like a seasoned public relations executive. Evelyn went on to explain the situation with the cool, unbothered efficiency of a vendor adjusting a delivery schedule, informing me that Chloe's boyfriend, Dr. Julian Price, had unexpectedly proposed 2 nights prior. Because Julian's prominent parents were flying back to North Carolina on Sunday morning, my mother had spontaneously organized a lavish, multi-course engagement feast in the Beaumont Room at the city's most exclusive country club. When I asked why no one had bothered to notify me after I had confirmed our dinner twice that week, Evelyn revealed the breathtaking architecture of her manipulation. On Friday evening, she had sent a private text message to every relative except me, claiming that my birthday dinner was being rescheduled to accommodate the engagement, and promising that she would square it with me personally. They had not stood me up in their minds. They had been carefully managed by a matriarch who considered my milestones entirely negotiable. She reminded me gently, as if reasoning with an unreasonable child, that an engagement occurs once in a lifetime, while a birthday happens every year. In that singular fragment of time, listening to my sister's laughter echo across a lavish ballroom 30 miles away, 35 years of unrequited family devotion condensed into a cold, unbreakable truth. Instead of breaking down or unleashing 35 years of accumulated grief into the receiver, I looked down at the 8 cold forks and replied with a level, quiet voice. I understand. What settled over me in that dimly lit steakhouse was not immediate sorrow, but an agonizingly sharp clarity, clean and sterile as surgical light. I hung up the phone, pulled out my camera, and took a single deliberate photograph of the untouched table. 8 empty place settings, the burning candle, and the buttercream cake bearing my name. In my family, history was malleable clay, and my mother was the master potter. I knew that by Monday morning, my total abandonment would be reshaped into a harmless scheduling misunderstanding, or blamed on my alleged emotional fragility. I needed unyielding, unalterable proof of what had actually occurred before her narrative could soften the harsh edges of reality. I paid the full reservation bill without complaint, handed the kind young waiter a $40 cash tip for his silent empathy, and asked him to box up the untouched lemon cake. As 2 busboys cleared the table in 90 seconds, erasing 3 weeks of meticulous planning before I even reached the exit, I walked out into the cool Cleveland rain, carrying my own birthday cake to my car. My hip buzzed against my coat with 3 frantic missed calls and a text from my best friend, Maya Vega, reading, "Do not drive home alone. Address incoming. You're spending tonight with people who actually show up for you." 40 minutes later, I was standing beneath a warm string of cafe lights in Maya's suburban backyard, holding a paper plate while 16 night shift nurses from the St. Jude Pediatric ICU sang at the top of their lungs around a wooden picnic table. In less than 90 minutes, Maya had made 4 quick phone calls from the break room, mobilizing our unit with the quiet, effortless efficiency that only nurses possess. Rose's husband had driven over with a steaming tray of fresh tamales. Dee had brought a cooler of drinks and a Bluetooth speaker. And June, who rarely spoke during handoff, handed me a birthday card signed by every single staff member on the night shift throughout the week. Maya stood on the porch steps, raised a red plastic cup, and delivered a toast that shattered my lifelong misconception of what family meant. To Nora, who shows up for everyone else every single night, tonight, we show up for her. As we sliced the Harlow's cake on a folding table with a plastic knife, surrounded by laughter and unfiltered warmth, I realized that nobody at that table had known me for more than 10 years. Yet every single one of them had arrived in under an hour without needing an invitation, a photo opportunity, or a performance. Looking at the photo Dee snapped of us crowded together, buttercream on my thumb and pure joy in my eyes, I knew the old era of paying for a seat at a table that wasn't mine was officially over. On Monday evening, after sleeping 9 unbroken hours for the first time in a month, I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone and opened the 2 photographs from Saturday night. Side by side in my digital library, they told the entire unvarnished story of my adult life. The first image captured the silent back room at Harlow's Steakhouse. 8 empty place settings, 8 silver forks resting on pristine linen, a candle wax pool, and an untouched buttercream cake reading "Happy 35th, Nora." The second image showed Maya's crowded, vibrant suburban backyard under twinkling strings of cafe lights, a rustic folding picnic table, paper plates, laughing night shift nurses, and that same lemon cake, half-eaten, with plastic forks. It took me nearly an hour to draft the caption because I refused to let my grief sound bitter or theatrical. I simply needed it to be unshakably true. In the end, it was brief. Turned 35 this weekend. Booked a table for 8. My family had more important plans. So my real family threw me a party in a backyard on 90 minutes notice after a 12-hour shift. Thank you for showing up. That's all love really is in the end. The people who actually show up for you. I did not tag my mother, nor did I mention Chloe, the country club engagement, or 35 years of quiet domestic sacrifice. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment before I pressed post, set the phone face down on my nightstand, and turned off the lamp, letting my old life end quietly in the dark. In a tight-knit suburban community like Maple Grove, Ohio, a quiet social media post doesn't go globally viral. Instead, it does something infinitely more surgical and devastating. It reaches the exact 300 people my mother had spent 40 years performing for. Church committee leaders, garden club matriarchs, and old neighbors from Linden Street all saw the side-by-side images during their morning coffee. Comments began accumulating steadily. Some from young pediatric nurses I had mentored over the years. Others from grateful parents whose critically ill children had passed through my ICU unit. One mother wrote, "This woman held our family together in the dark for 9 harrowing days. Happy birthday, Nora." Then came the fatal, catastrophic blows from 2 women inside my mother's own inner social circle. One asked, "Is this Evelyn's daughter?" While the second left a single devastating line. Some people count best when they think no one is watching. The polished, impenetrable facade of the perfect Vance family, constructed through 4 decades of manicured Christmas cards and curated toasts, fractured irrevocably in a single morning. When my Aunt Trish called me, her flustered voice trembled as she admitted that my mother had sent a private Friday message telling everyone the birthday dinner was rescheduled. The carefully managed web of lies was unraveling, and for the first time in 35 years, the town was seeing the unedited truth. At precisely 9 o'clock on Tuesday night, as I was quietly watering the zinnia seedlings on my kitchen windowsill, familiar headlights swept across my front porch and sat idling in the driveway. Evelyn did not knock. She had never knocked on doors she considered her rightful domain. She burst through my front entryway mid-sentence, her tailored winter coat still buttoned tightly to her throat, with my father trailing 2 reluctant steps behind her, his hands jammed deep into his jacket pockets. Standing in the middle of my small living room like a hostile health inspector, my mother cataloged my entire life with one sweeping, disgusted glance before launching into her dramatic attack. She declared the post humiliating, vindictive, and utterly abominable, claiming that Sharon from church had already called her in absolute shock. She demanded that I delete the photograph immediately and publish a public correction that she had already meticulously drafted into her smartphone, a fabricated statement explaining that a minor scheduling misunderstanding had occurred and that our loving family had celebrated my birthday privately in advance. When I looked her in the eye and pointed out that she had told the family I rescheduled while telling me she was coming, something shifted in her posture. Not genuine guilt, but a cold, calculating recalibration of her strategy. She snapped that an engagement happens once in a lifetime, insisting she was merely protecting family unity during her youngest daughter's most important weekend in Maple Grove. I looked past my mother's flushed, theatrical rage and met the quiet, haunted eyes of my father, Arthur, who had picked up a framed photograph of Grandma Ruth from my bookshelf and was studying it with intense, desperate concentration. He held the silver frame with trembling fingers, pretending the old black and white photograph required his entire soul's attention, just to avoid intervening in his wife's verbal assault, or acknowledging the undeniable truth of my words. I turned back to my mother, squared my shoulders, and spoke with the calm, unwavering tone I reserved for panicked parents in the pediatric ICU. It's my birthday photo, Mom. It stays up. The room instantly plunged into a suffocating, frozen silence that felt heavier than winter ice. My father set the frame down on the shelf with agonizing, delicate care, walked silently out the front door without making eye contact, and started the car engine, sitting alone in the dark driveway. Realizing her absolute authority had collapsed beyond repair, Evelyn buttoned her topcoat collar and delivered her exit line with the icy precision of a woman leaving an insultingly small tip. Take it down tonight, Nora, or you will deeply regret what happens next. As the front door slammed shut behind her, echoing through the quiet house, I didn't feel fear, regret, or hesitation. Instead, I felt the extraordinary, weightless lightness of a woman who had finally stopped bargaining for a seat at a table that was never hers in the first place. What followed over the next several weeks was a masterclass in passive-aggressive exile, executed with the terrifying efficiency of a seasoned political strategist. My mother did not call me again, Instead, she systematically weaponized her social network against me, circulating a soft, tragic narrative through the church choir and garden club that I was going through a mental health crisis due to severe ICU nurse burnout. She posted a throwback Easter photograph of our family, squinting on the porch years ago, captioning it, "Family is everything. Forgiveness is everything," which collected nearly 100 sympathetic, pious likes. Formal engagement party invitations printed on heavy cream cardstock were mailed out to the entire town, and my name was glaringly, deliberately excluded from the guest list. Shortly after, I discovered I had been quietly removed from the 40-year family group chat, erasing decades of shared domestic logistics like a door painted over by an administrator. Relatives grew distant, sending polite, flattened text messages that mimicked the distant tone used with a coworker on their way out the door. Yet, as the artificial isolation settled around me, I didn't crumble or beg for re-entry. I took extra shifts at the hospital, shared home-cooked dinners with Maya's vibrant family, and nurtured the tall, stubborn zinnias blooming on my sunny windowsill. The forced exile was meant to be my ultimate punishment. But in the quiet sanctuary of my own home, it felt like the first real peace I had ever known in my adult life. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, my sister Chloe arrived at my duplex unannounced, holding a thick, formal envelope bearing the return address of a prominent trust litigation law firm in downtown Cleveland. Sitting across from me at my kitchen table, Chloe wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and admitted with a tired, unvarnished honesty that our mother had no intention of stopping her psychological war against me. Inside the envelope was a sleek, 3-paragraph legal notice from the attorney representing the Ruth Vance Family Trust, composed in the razor-sharp, courteous language reserved for corporate executions. The letter formally stated that the sole trustee, Evelyn Vance, was evaluating the immediate disposition and sale of the trust's primary real estate asset, Grandma Ruth's beloved 2-bedroom cottage nestled on the shores of Lake Erie, valued at roughly $200,000. Furthermore, the document noted in polished legalese that any voluntary property tax payments made by third parties over recent years conferred 0 ownership equity, 0 legal standing, and 0 financial recourse whatsoever. My mother had known about my quiet 6-year sacrifice all along. She had simply kept those receipts in reserve as unmentioned leverage, waiting for the precise moment to weaponize them against me. Translated out of sterile legal phrasing, the letter delivered an unmistakable ultimatum. I know about your private sanctuary with your grandmother's ghost, and if you continue to embarrass me by refusing to perform for my audience, I will sell the one place on earth where you ever felt truly loved. The following Monday afternoon, I paid $150 for a 30-minute legal consultation with Clara Brooks, a seasoned trust and estate attorney whose calm demeanor and sharp reading glasses radiated decades of court-tested wisdom. Sitting in her high-rise Cleveland office, overlooking the cold waters of Lake Erie, Attorney Brooks carefully examined my 6 years of county property tax receipts, the original family trust agreement, and the formal legal notice sent by my mother's high-priced counsel. After performing a quick calculation, she leaned back in her leather chair, looked at me over the rim of her glasses, and gave me the unvarnished legal reality of my situation. She explained that by deliberately allowing the cottage property taxes to go delinquent to the point of a county tax auction list 6 years ago, my mother had committed a severe, undeniable breach of fiduciary duty as trustee under Ohio law. Attorney Brooks assured me that with the unyielding paper trail of my personal tax receipts, we could easily file an emergency motion in county probate court, freeze the impending sale of the Lake Erie property, and petition the judge to formally strip my mother of her trustee status forever. "You hold every single card here, Nora," Clara told me plainly, her voice confident and measured. Her legal position is exceptionally weak, and if we take this to court, we can make her life miserable, expose her financial mismanagement, and very likely win this entire case after a brief legal battle. I sat in the quiet law office for a long, heavy moment, feeling the immense, destructive weight of the legal weapon Attorney Brooks had placed in my hands. A fierce, instinctual urge inside me wanted to press the button, to march boldly into a county probate court, lay out 6 years of receipts, shatter my mother's immaculate public reputation, and claim the ultimate victory I had earned through years of quiet sacrifice. But as I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the gray, undulating waters of the lake, a profound, transformative realization washed over my soul. I realized that if I chose to enter that courtroom and wage a bitter war over bricks and timber, I would be adopting the exact same toxic armor my mother had worn her entire life, calculating numbers, litigating affection, and measuring my human worth through absolute control. Winning the cottage through legal warfare meant letting her drag me down into the muddy arena she had ruled for 40 years. I looked back at Attorney Brooks, smiled gently, and declined to file the lawsuit. It was not an act of surrender or cowed weakness, but a supreme declaration of emotional sovereignty and personal dignity. My mother believed she was holding my grandmother's cottage hostage to force my total obedience. But she failed to understand that Grandma Ruth's true legacy was never the wooden porch or the lakefront view. It was the unshakable self-worth she had planted in my heart, a treasure no legal battle could ever give or take away. That evening, after returning home to my quiet duplex, I went searching through the hall closet for the shoebox containing my old nursing school pinning program and county tax receipts, determined to organize my past once and for all. Resting on the shelf above it was the weathered cardboard carton of personal papers I had cleared out of Grandma Ruth's desk 6 years ago. Containing an old photograph I had never truly studied with open eyes. It was a stark, black and white portrait of my mother at 16 years old, standing rigidly beside a grand piano trophy, her smile stretched tight as piano wire. Her own mother, my grandmother Margaret, a woman I remembered only as a cold, austere room, stood directly behind her, with a heavy, controlling hand clamped firmly onto young Evelyn's shoulder. This time, as I slid the old photograph out of its protective plastic sleeve, a yellowed, handwritten letter fell from behind the frame, folded neatly into thirds, and addressed to Ruth's sister, though it had never been stamped or mailed. The delicate, fading cursive handwriting belonged unmistakably to Grandma Ruth. Written during the summer my mother had married into the Vance family. Ruth wrote about her new daughter-in-law with a heartbreaking blend of deep pity and dread, detailing a candid conversation she had shared with Margaret at the rehearsal dinner. A sudden, unexpected revelation that unlocked 40 years of painful family history in a single, illuminating paragraph that changed everything for me going forward in my own personal life. In the unmailed letter, Grandma Ruth recalled how Margaret had proudly boasted about forcing 16-year-old Evelyn to practice the piano for 4 uninterrupted hours every single day, keeping a mechanical kitchen timer on top of the instrument to track every agonizing second. In the unmailed letter, Grandma Ruth recalled how Margaret had proudly boasted about forcing 16-year-old Evelyn to practice the piano for 4 uninterrupted hours every single day, keeping a mechanical kitchen timer on top of the instrument to track every agonizing second. Margaret had gleefully remarked that young Evelyn would break down in terrified tears whenever she placed second in a regional competition. Not out of personal disappointment, Ruth noted, but out of sheer, paralyzing fear of her mother's harsh, conditional approval. Sitting on my hallway floor in the quiet night, looking at that teenage girl frozen in silver halide, I finally understood the dark root of my mother's emotional illness. Evelyn had not been born a cold marketplace. She had been systematically raised inside one. She had been measured, timed, and charted until she survived by becoming the undisputed master of the game, ensuring she would never have to feel the crushing agony of losing ever again. Understanding her trauma did not erase the pain of the empty birthday table, render the trustee letter kind, or save the Lake Erie cottage. But it settled one crucial truth in my spirit. I was not fighting my mother. I was fighting the generational monster that had consumed her soul. And the only true way to defeat such a terrible monster is to refuse to feed it your own life. Step off the hamster wheel entirely and protect all future generations from its endless appetite for human sacrifice and quiet domestic compliance. On the Saturday afternoon following my legal consultation, my sister Chloe visited my duplex under the guise of an informal chat, bringing along coffee and an uncharacteristic lack of makeup that felt like a deliberate act of emotional disarmament. Sitting across from me at my kitchen table, she laid out the exact terms of the peace treaty our mother had masterminded for the upcoming social event of the season, Mom and Dad's 40th wedding anniversary gala at the country club. Chloe explained that Evelyn had literally scripted a specific moment into the official evening program where I would stand up before 90 curated guests, take the microphone, and deliver a few warm, healing words, a delicate apology, without ever explicitly using the word apology, framing the summer's conflict as a minor misunderstanding that grew in the telling. In exchange for my 20 seconds of public performance, the gates of the family sanctuary would instantly swing open once again. My name would be restored to the group chat. I would stand as a bridesmaid at Chloe's lavish country club wedding. And most importantly, the Lake Erie cottage would remain safely within the family trust for my future children. It was a masterclass in social engineering, offering me back everything I had spent 35 years longing for, wrapped in a neat corporate bow. All I had to do was step back into the spotlight, read the lines assigned to me by the director, and pay my customary fee of quiet self-humiliation to purchase my seat at the table once more. What made the encounter hauntingly memorable, however, was not the scripted offer itself, but the unexpected crack that appeared in my sister's polished facade as she sat across from me. Chloe looked at the formal legal letter resting against my fruit bowl, wrapped her manicured hands tightly around her coffee mug, and uttered a sentence I never thought I would hear from the family's designated favorite. "You think I don't see the game, Nora? I know the game better than you do. It's just infinitely easier when you're the one winning it." For a fleeting second, the golden posture slipped away, and I caught a tragic, illuminating glimpse of the 9-year-old girl who had been systematically turned toward cameras her entire life, trained to perform for maternal affection just as ruthlessly as I had been trained to perform as the family servant. Chloe wasn't cruel. She was simply an inmate who had chosen the luxury suite inside our mother's psychological prison, well aware that her golden status depended entirely on remaining the compliant exhibit for the public. She gathered her purse and left without pressing me for a final answer, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence in my kitchen that lingered for hours. As her car pulled out of the driveway, I sat alone with an agonizing internal fracture, torn between the visceral desire to reclaim Grandma Ruth's porch swing and the terrifying realization that returning to the fold meant surrendering my soul forever to a life of perpetual pretense. Later that evening, sensing that weeks of artificial isolation had prepared the soil for my total capitulation, my mother sent a text message, warm as fresh bread. "Sweetheart, this rift has gone on far too long, and it's breaking my heart. Come Saturday, say a few words from your heart. That's all anyone needs, and everything is forgiven. Dad misses you. And I think you know the cottage should stay in this family for your children someday." Every single word in that message was a precision legal instrument calibrated to fit the exact grooves worn into my consciousness over 35 long years. Driven by a desperate, instinctual hunger for peace and familial connection, I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours and crafted the apology draft. It was brilliant. A masterwork of diplomatic polish that thanked my parents for their lifelong sacrifices, characterized the birthday disaster as a mutual miscommunication, and declared that family was complicated. I read the draft out loud to the zinnia seedlings on my windowsill, and as the refined sentences echoed off the quiet kitchen walls, a profound terror seized my chest. I realized with sickening clarity that 35 years of conditioning had made me an expert at buying my seat back at any personal cost. I could compose my own total surrender in my sleep, fluently speaking my mother's dialect of performance, manipulation, and polished pretense without missing a single beat or making a single mistake in front of others in our family community. The final, decisive awakening arrived 3 nights later, during a grueling 12-hour shift in the pediatric ICU at St. Jude Children's Hospital. We were caring for a 6-year-old post-operative cardiac patient whose mother was a 24-year-old warehouse worker who spent her days packing heavy crates and her nights sitting in a vinyl hospital chair. Every evening at 7 o'clock, that young mother appeared in the doorway, exhausted and silent, gently holding her daughter's tiny foot through the blanket because the maze of IV lines and monitor wires made her afraid to hold anything else. At 3 in the morning, I stood in the doorway and watched that woman sleeping upright in the dim glow of the pulse oximeter, her calloused fingers still tenderly closed around her child's ankle. There were no cameras documenting her devotion, no social media audience, no church committee, and no birthday cake to validate her efforts. Standing in that quiet doorway, a single sentence crystallized in my mind with surgical precision. Love you have to earn is just wages. I had spent 35 years as the hardest working, most reliable employee in a toxic family business that was never going to make me a partner. Continually apologizing for asking about my basic human benefits. I walked back to the nurse's station, pulled out my smartphone, and permanently deleted the apology draft from my device without rereading a single line of surrender, submission, or regret ever again in my personal life going forward in this world. Instead of drafting another counterargument, I sent my mother a brief 5-word text message responding to her long offer. I will be there Saturday. She replied within 60 seconds with enthusiastic approval, instructing me to wear my blue dress, blissfully unaware that I had no intention of playing the subordinate role she had scripted for me. That evening at home, I performed a small, irreversible act of personal liberation. I worked the brass cottage key off my keyring, listening to the sharp metallic click as it slid free, leaving a bare gap between my house key and my hospital ID badge. I dropped the heavy key into a thick manila envelope, alongside 6 years of stamped county property tax receipts and the yellowed, unmailed letter Grandma Ruth had written decades ago. I wasn't going to the Fairview Country Club ballroom to beg for forgiveness, perform an apology, or negotiate for a seat at a table that required my ultimate, ongoing subjugation. I was going to hand my life back to them, settle the ledger once and for all, and walk away into the open air. As I sealed the envelope, my hands stopped shaking, replaced by an unshakable, profound peace, the quiet certainty of a woman who was finally ready to step off the clock forever and never pay another single dime for love in her adult life ever again from this night forward into her peaceful, sovereign future as an independent human being. The Fairview Country Club ballroom was my mother's crowning masterpiece, an architectural exercise in curated perfection where 40 years of marriage were showcased before 90 meticulously chosen guests. Gold script banners stretched across the vaulted ceiling. A 3-piece jazz ensemble played standards at polite conversation volume, and warm chandeliers illuminated tables filled with church committee matriarchs, garden club members, and prominent community figures. At a side table near the guest book, elegant printed programs detailed the evening's timeline: cocktails, dinner, dancing. toasts. And there, scheduled precisely between the champagne toast and the cake cutting, sat the line item. A few words from our daughter, Nora. Evelyn had typeset my total surrender into her itinerary, allotting me exactly 20 seconds to perform my public repentance in front of her social circle. I arrived entirely alone, wearing the modest blue dress my mother had requested, moving through the crowd like a quiet observer in a theater of manufactured harmony. In my hand, I carried no wrapped gift or sentimental card, only a flat, heavy manila envelope that rested against my side like a passport to freedom. As I greeted old family acquaintances who offered sympathetic pats on my arm, praising my mother's enduring patience through such a difficult summer, I felt no surge of anger or impulse to argue. The air inside the ballroom was thick with artificial sweetness, but beneath my ribs, a calm, steady stillness took root. The quiet, unshakable serenity of a woman who had finally stopped bargaining for her own worth in a house built on pretense. Midway through the evening, as the dinner plates were cleared and the house lights dimmed into a warm, dramatic amber glow, my mother took the stage with the effortless grace of a seasoned performer who had never once been interrupted in her own venue. Standing beside my father near the towering 2-tier anniversary cake, Evelyn held the microphone in one manicured hand, her voice weaving a luminous narrative of family devotion, enduring sacrifice, and maternal triumph across 4 long decades of marriage. She spoke movingly of raising 2 daughters, pointing toward the slideshow beaming photographs onto the velvet curtain, Chloe at dance recitals, Chloe at graduation, curated holiday cards, while my rare appearances in the background served merely as decorative timestamps. Then, with a practiced pause that drew the entire room into a breathless silence, Evelyn lowered her voice to a theatrical, tender frequency and pivoted toward her grand finale. She announced to the 90 listening faces that true families are tested by life's unexpected storms, but that real daughters always find their way back home when love calls them. With a triumphant, radiant smile that had managed my quiet compliance for 35 long years, she extended her arm toward where I stood in the aisle, calling my name with melodic, supreme confidence. And now our eldest daughter, Nora, has a few words she would like to share from her heart with all of us tonight in this room as we welcome her home at last. A 90-pair gaze rotated toward me like a field of satellite dishes as I walked steadily down the center aisle, the heavy manila envelope held loosely at my side. I stepped onto the small stage, took the microphone from my mother's warm fingers, and kept my voice at the exact steady register I reserved for panicked parents in the pediatric ICU at 3 a.m. "Happy 40th anniversary, Mom and Dad," I began softly, my words carrying clearly through the silent hall. 40 years is a remarkable milestone, and I honor it. Most of you in this room know our family as a picture of reliable perfection, and my mother taught me long ago that we must always show up where it counts. I paused, looking directly into my mother's widening eyes as the color began to drain from her face. 6 years ago, when Grandma Ruth passed away, the property taxes on her Lake Erie cottage went unpaid, and the county placed it on the auction list. For 6 years, I have quietly paid those taxes out of my nursing salary, keeping that porch open because it was the one place this family ever allowed me to be a daughter instead of staff. Without breaking eye contact, I reached into my envelope, pulled out the brass key, 6 years of stamped tax receipts, and the yellowed, unmailed letter Grandma Ruth had written decades ago, laying them directly beside the golden banner on the 2-tier cake for everyone to see. A collective, sharp intake of breath rippled through the 90 guests, half-contained gasps mixing with frozen silence as the unscripted reality shattered the ballroom's polished facade. I looked across the quiet room, meeting the shocked gazes of church matriarchs, my sister Chloe studying her champagne glass with a tragic, knowing look, and my mother, whose smile had finally cracked open to reveal the raw panic beneath her carefully painted mask. "The taxes are paid through December, Mom," I continued, my tone devoid of bitterness, malice, or theatrical anger. "After that, the cottage is entirely yours to keep, sell, or stage for realtors, along with whichever story you choose to tell about tonight. I know it will be a brilliant narrative. You have always been the better author." I took a deep, grounding breath, feeling 35 years of invisible weight lift off my shoulders as I delivered the final, undeniable truth to everyone present in that room. I came tonight because you asked me to speak from the heart. So here it is. I spent 35 years trying to earn a seat at this family's table. But love you have to earn is just wages. And tonight, I am officially off the clock. Congratulations on 40 years. The anniversary is real. Even when the album isn't. With gentle precision, I set the microphone back into its stand, turned away from the stage, and began walking down the center aisle toward the exit at an unhurried, ordinary pace without looking back once. I had taken only 4 steps toward the glass doors when my mother's voice shattered her 40-year lacquer, rising into a sharp, unscripted shriek that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "After everything this family has done for you?" But before she could launch into her public tirade, a sound broke through the room that no one in Maple Grove had heard in 4 decades. From his place near the bar, my father, Arthur, stepped forward, his face flushed not with embarrassment, but with an explosive, long-buried authority that commanded absolute silence from everyone present. "Evelyn, enough!" Arthur roared, his voice cutting through the ballroom with the thunderous weight of a man who had finally awakened from a 40-year sleep. He walked over to the stage, picked up the manila envelope containing the receipts and Ruth's letter, and looked directly into his wife's stunned eyes. "Enough," he repeated, his tone dropping into a low, steady murmur that carried across the quiet room. She is right. Every single word she said is true. And we have spent 35 years using her goodness to keep our peace. In the breathtaking, stunned silence that enveloped the 90 onlookers, I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the Fairview Country Club and stepped out into the cool night air, listening to the soft click of the latch behind me. the sound of a door closing on the past, leaving me entirely, beautifully free in my new life going forward, into the open world. The night parking lot was cool and smelled of fresh-cut grass, damp pavement, and autumn pine, the gravel crunching beneath my heels as my hands shook with the fierce, delayed adrenaline of a captive who had finally broken her chains. Before I reached my car, the heavy doors of the country club swung open once more, spilling a brief fragment of jazz music into the darkness as my sister Chloe emerged, running awkwardly across the gravel in her champagne silk dress, holding her high heels in one hand and a faded wooden box in the other. She stopped 3 feet away from me, breathless and disheveled, tears smudging her mascara as she held out Grandma Ruth's wooden recipe box, its hand-lettered index cards soft at the corners, overflowing with handwritten recipes that had sustained my childhood. Chloe swallowed hard and whispered that Mom had been staging the cottage for realtors and intended to throw the box away, confessing that she had rescued it from the donate pile weeks ago. As I took the wooden box into my arms, my sister looked at me with a poignant, agonizing envy, her voice fracturing as she said, "You're free now, Nora. You actually walked away." There was no anger between us, only the quiet tragedy of 2 sisters who had inherited the same psychological cage. One who had paid her way into freedom, and one who remained behind to manage the golden sweet. She kissed my cheek, turned back toward the bright chandeliers, and left me alone with my grandmother's memory. The aftermath unfolded with the quiet, inevitable arithmetic of a life finally unburdened by domestic performance and silent obligation. In October, the Lake Erie cottage was formally sold to a young family from Mentor with 3 children and a golden retriever for a little over $200,000. Every single penny deposited directly into the trust my mother administered. My mother spent the following months circulating her own polished narrative through Maple Grove, claiming I had suffered a tragic emotional breakdown from ICU nurse burnout. But the country club ballroom had been too full of witnesses. The town choir did not disband, but it permanently lost confidence in its soloist. My sister Chloe's lavish wedding took place in April, and while my name was absent from the guest list, the exclusion no longer felt like a surgical wound, echoing merely like distant weather across the lake. The most tender bridge, however, emerged from the dark garage on Linden Street every first Sunday of the month at precisely 8 in the morning, when my father called my cell phone. We never mentioned my mother, nor did we litigate the past. Instead, we spoke softly about complex pediatric cases he had read about in medical journals and old classic car carburetors I barely understood. It was a fragile, narrow bridge, rated strictly for 2 people. But as we walked on it with quiet care, I realized that truth doesn't require grand public spectacles. Sometimes it simply needs 2 people willing to speak softly without an audience. When my 36th birthday arrived on a warm, breezy Saturday afternoon in May, I did not book a round table at a downtown steakhouse, print custom menus, or send nervous confirmation texts to unbothered relatives. By 6 o'clock in the evening, my suburban backyard was overflowing with vibrant golden light, clinking iced tea glasses, and genuine, unscripted human warmth. Maya and her young daughter were playfully debating music playlists on the patio. Rose's husband had taken over my small charcoal grill with trays of marinated chicken, and June, Dee, and half the night shift from the St. Jude Pediatric ICU were scattered across lawn chairs alongside my 81-year-old neighbor, Mr. Whitaker, who had brought a jar of pickles he made himself. In the center of the lawn stood the crown jewel of the evening, a long, beautifully crafted, solid oak dining table that my night shift colleagues had secretly chipped in to build for me during their off days that spring. It featured exactly 8 sturdy wooden chairs, constructed not as an ironic monument to the past, but as a loving, permanent testament to the present. 8 seats created by people who possessed sharp humor, fierce loyalty, and boundless hearts. Sitting at the head of that wooden table, surrounded by paper plates, unfiltered laughter, and people who had arrived without needing an invitation, a photo opportunity, or an invoice, I looked at the crowded chairs and felt a profound, quiet wave of tears well up in my eyes as true happiness took root. Along the cedar fence at the edge of my garden, a dazzling, vibrant ribbon of crimson, gold, and magenta zinnias stood tall against the evening breeze, their sturdy stalks swaying gracefully in the twilight air. They had grown from 3 faded paper seed packets I had found tucked neatly into the back of Grandma Ruth's recipe box, buried right behind her handwritten card for lemon raspberry cake. Ruth had bought those seeds decades ago, preserving them in the dark until they found a soil that was finally ready to nourish them, without judgment, timers, or harsh conditions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow across the yard, Mr. Whitaker leaned over his pickle jar and remarked that zinnias were the most resilient flowers in Ohio, blooming brightest precisely when planted in open ground after a long, hard frost. I watched my friends laugh around the oak table, their faces illuminated by strings of warm cafe lights, and realized that my grandmother had left those seeds behind as a silent, sacred prophecy for my future life. She knew that real love, like a wild seed, cannot survive inside a sterile greenhouse built on pretense, manipulation, and perfectionism. It requires open air, rain, and the courage to break through the dark earth. Standing beside those vibrant blossoms, I smelled the sweet, earthy scent of blooming petals and knew that the soil of my life had finally become fertile, whole, and completely mine. Looking back across the long, transformative journey from an empty table for 8 at Harlow's Steakhouse to a crowded backyard filled with chosen family, I finally understood the ultimate lesson my 35 years had been trying to teach me. The historic colonial house on Linden Street and the Lake Erie cottage were never the true measures of my worth. Nor were the manicured Christmas cards or the performative toasts of a family that traded affection for compliance. My greatest victory was not that I had exposed the truth or defeated my mother's narrative, but that I had possessed the quiet courage to step off the clock, hand back my wages, and refuse to teach future generations that love is something you must earn through self-effacement, silence, and submission. If love keeps a ledger, tracks hours, and demands humiliation in exchange for a chair, it is not love at all. It is merely employment, a transactional arrangement where you will always be an underpaid worker. The moment you gather your dignity, step away from the table where you are required to pay for your seat, and walk out into the cool night air, you do not lose a family. You reclaim your own soul. And somewhere between the closed door and the open horizon, you will discover that the table built by those who truly see you will always be full, overflowing, and endlessly, beautifully home forever in this life.